Automating Inequality, How High-Tech Tools Profile, Police, and Punish the Poor by Virginia Eubanks is a nonfiction book. I usually don't read nonfiction. I've only read like a couple, but this was at a book sale and it was interesting. Just wanted to see what it was about. So essentially, this book is about the poorhouse. Back in the industrial age, like 1910, 1920, the government created poorhouses, which are these basically large warehouse-like places where people are forced to do labor. However, it wasn't forced labor, it was voluntary. So let's say you're a person who's fallen on hard times while traveling, or a single mother, or someone who just needs money. You would basically volunteer to work at these awful labor houses, these poorhouses, basically, and you would do hard labor for very little money. They'd feed you, but not good food, and you all sleep shoulder to shoulder, basically. And these places didn't have washrooms or heat or basically anything. And once the poorhouses were abolished, however, the digital age would come, and the digital age basically has this new way of profiling and keeping poor people down. One of the biggest misinformation things is that people who require aid are lazy or trailer trash or basically the scum of society if you need food stamps or government aid. That's mainly a sort of government thing. The book explores the history of different government groups trying to limit the people's wanting to get the benefits that they should get. For example, if you, this is America, by the way, this book explores America, but if you're an American and let's say you have like a daughter who has diabetes, you might not be able to afford all the insulin because you might not have, enough from the medical plan from your work, or maybe recently got fired. So you would therefore use the benefits from the government or from the healthcare plan. And this book basically goes over 3 different sections of how the digital age has created a new digital poorhouse. Basically, the first section is about Indiana. They had this new sort of contract with IBM to streamline the system. So instead of having a caseworker working with you and having that human element, they took that away and made sure that you only have call centers to call. So it's missing that human element. And essentially, they would cut off people with unfair deadlines. They would give you only a week to respond, but then they'd send you the letter and you wouldn't get it for 5 days. So you end up scrambling to do something. If you've missed a signature on something, they would just hit you down with did not comply, and then your funding basically gets cut off. So Indiana is explored, and the author went and got a lot of interviews with all the people there. And the second one is about the gentrification of Skid Row in California, and how the system essentially makes it really hard for homeless people to get the housing that they're owed from people who have to pay out of their own pocket to go into the process to giving all their sensitive personal information in this huge database. It doesn't guarantee them a place to live. So if you're a homeless person and you want to get an SRO, you're gonna have to give up all your ID and all your personal information and all these personal questions. You might not even get a place to live for 3 years, because sometimes they just want a database of all this information so they can keep track of you. And then they have all these algorithms and crazy things to categorize you with a score. So if you're between 1 and 17, the higher you go, the more likely you get a house. But however, people let's say you get put in jail a lot for vagrancy, they'll give you a low score, basically saying that you're always going to be put in prison, so there's no point putting you up somewhere. So people with a lower score are deprioritized, and then basically you're screwed. And there are some really unfair aspects that I didn't know. Reading nonfiction lets you open your eyes to things. For example, homeless people in America, if they get arrested for whatever reason, like vagrancy or public intoxication or prostitution or any of that stuff, they can be put away for 2 to 4 months, and then all of their stuff gets stolen. That's one of the biggest risks of being a homeless person. While you're not there protecting your tent or your cart, someone will just come by and they'll notice that you haven't been there for a few days, take all your stuff, your ID, all your important documents, and when you get out of jail, usually from just a time limit or whatever, you have to start from square one. So that was the second part of the book. The third book was Allegheny, Pennsylvania, how they have this new system to predict child abuse, and how basically it's a self-serving system that never allows you to leave, because they explored one family that was basically harassed by a neighbor or several neighbors that kept calling child services on their kid, usually for revenge. Like, for example, they called and said, hey, the little girl was seen across the park by herself, or I saw a little girl not wearing a sweater on a cold day or something. And they have to, child services has to go. It doesn't matter if it's a frivolous call or it's a crank call or if it's a genuine concern, they have to investigate. And every time they came, their score would get bumped up. So the parents would then, be afraid to go to the hospital emergency room for like a broken bone or something, or some sort of emergency, because their fictional score keeps going up. And then, one day they're afraid that one day someone's going to knock on the door and be like, we're going to take your kids away. So it becomes a self-serving sort of snake eating its own tail type of thing, because the parents have a score, and because the neighbors called on them so many times, the little girl has a score. So when she grows up and she goes to university or whatever, and then she gets married, has kids, she's going to have a score too, and it's going to affect her kids. And it's something that the digital age is very pervasive, because back in the paper running days, paper eventually dissolves or eventually falls apart. The digital age allows this to be in the system forever. You're never out of the system. This family will never be able to get out unless the daughter doesn't have any kids, but the score is still going to be there. She basically can't shake it off, and it's really unfair. So automatic inequality wasn't the easiest read, to be honest. It's a lot of numbers thrown at you. It almost feels like a documentary at times because of all the personal interviews she did. And sometimes it's not one-sided. It's not like she just sits there going like, the system's completely broken. One of the interviews was a homeless man who just refused to be part of the system. Whenever he goes to a shelter, if they make him give up his phone, he doesn't want to because he wants that cell phone. Or he refuses to pay out of pocket to give them a copy of his birth certificate because he doesn't want to be in the system unless it's guaranteed. So he's not forthcoming either. So there's a little bit of both-sided on the argument of helping the homeless get in or benefits. It's a very scary horror-like elements, such as finding out that you're something that you need, like medicine to stop seizures, is going to be cut off because of a new automated streamlined system. But Automatic Inequality is an eye-opening book that if you can handle it, it's definitely worth checking out to find out a little bit more about the world. I know it's about just America, but it's interesting to see how it's evolved over the years. So definitely check out Automatic Inequality by Virginia Eubanks.